Hey guys, how you doing today? Just out for a daily walk. Look at me, I'm in the sunlight for once. Well, sunlight, it's kind of a cloudy day, windy day. Sorry about the wind. I need to figure out how to get a configuration so that you guys don't get hit with this like sound effect that hits you when the wind picks up. But so far, I'm just a poor guy with who's managed to get a hold of one of these phones, shouting into the universe. Today I want to talk about two events and how they wrap around the idea of what is the capitalist ideology, right? So there's a fellow, his name is, I'm completely blanking on his name. Isn't that embarrassing? I'm an embarrassing person sometimes. So there's a fellow here in Toronto who is building tiny homes for the homeless, right? It's very effective, very helpful for these homeless people to have a place, even if it's a small, tiny little place to call their own. Just something like to even be able to put a lock on a door, right? To even be able to like close the place up. It's a brilliant thing that he's doing, and he's raised like $200,000 in order to do this. Absolutely wonderful. Speaks to the idea of you don't need to ask permission to do things. You should just do them, right? And let the capitalists try and keep up with you. And so in this particular case, they are stopping this guy from doing this because they're considering what he's doing as like a fire hazard or any of this kind of stuff, because they're more concerned about their property than they are concerned about the human lives, right? That's like the basic bottom line on that. The second event that is going on, you can see it in Texas. So grocery stores have had to throw out food, right? Because there's been big power outages. So these grocery stores throw a bunch of food in their bins. Well, so there's a bunch of food in the bins, right? So homeless people and people who are low income, they don't have a whole lot of food. They think to themselves, hey, let's go down to the grocery store. Let's go get this food, right? And you'd think that the grocery store owner or the people in charge of these grocery stores would be like, yeah, sure. You know, like this food's going to go to waste anyway. It's getting thrown in the bin as it is. But what happens? The police show up and they guard these bins to make sure that nobody actually pulls food out of them, right? So again, in this particular case, it's as wasteful as it can be. It's not even them caring about the property. It's them caring about their ideology, right? And this is key. This particular example really does reveal the ideological basis of capitalism and shows it for what it is, which is a death cult. It's always been a death cult. The ideological basis of capitalism revolves around the idea that money is God, right? It elevates money into a sphere that it doesn't belong, right? It would be like claiming the hammer you had is sent by Christ himself, right? And that, well, whatever the hammer decides, right? And he who holds the hammer is the one who makes the decision. Money isn't real, right? It's a tool that we create in order to facilitate trade between one another, right? It's not but capitalism, what it has done is it has elevated money into the status of moral decider, right? This is the basis of the ideology. And you can see it all over the culture, right? Like, I see it all the time whenever I attempt to advocate for poverty alleviation, right? I'll say something like, look, we should have a basic income because no person should go without food and shelter, right? Like that seems like a clean way to deal with this issue. And the response that I'll get is like, oh well, you know, people aren't inherently good, John. They'll do bad things with their time, or they'll waste their time, according to us, or any of this kind of stuff. And then I'll look at them and be like, oh, so a poor person, so a person is naturally not good, is naturally bad, according to you, unless they have money, right? So unless they have the ability to actually inflict a lot of evil in the world through vast sums of wealth, then they're a bad person. But the moment that they get enough wealth that they can inflict negative consequences in the world, they become a good person, right? And this is exactly, to which of course the capitalists don't actually have an answer to, right? They can't respond to that because they haven't even thought through their own ideology, right? All they know is that money good, right? If you have a vast sum of money, this makes you a better person than other people. And so if you can't afford to buy food, then the capitalist class is put into a position to throw away food. Well, too bad, right? We the capitalists have been put in this position to throw this food away, and just because it's completely wasteful doesn't mean that you dirty poor people should benefit, right? Doesn't mean that the poor people should see, because if we start doing that, well, then poor people might come to expect that kind of treatment. You know, people might actually begin to expect having food and shelter naturally provided by their civilization, right? Which, by the way, we should expect that, right? The whole point of having a civilization and a culture and a society, the whole point is to easily provide food and shelter. And we have the technology, we have the ability, we have the know-how in order to provide these things. But what we have run up against is an ideology, right? An ideology that doesn't care about practical solutions. Like, my path into communism began through just attempting to find practical solutions, right? I would literally just say, like, look, people should have food and shelter, right? And I would say to everybody, I'd be like, you think people should have food and shelter, right? Like, everyone should have access to food and shelter. And even the most hardline arch-conservative type is going to say yes to that. No one's going to disagree, to your face anyway, that everybody should have food and shelter, right? But if you start saying that, and you start saying, well, okay, so then what are some practical solutions to actually resolving this? Like, forget about your ideology, forget about any of that kind of stuff. How do we solve this problem? Well, then they call you a communist. And I just kind of got sick of it, you know? And one day I just said, like, you know what? Yeah, fine. I'm a communist, right? If that's what you need to hear, right? And then it's all like, atrocities and this, that, and the other thing, because they can't, like, once you go down this rabbit hole of, hey, there are easy, doable, practical solutions to these problems, once you release this ideology that the capitalist death cult has put upon us, right? Well, there needs to be methods that the capitalists have to obfuscate or twist the argument so that you can't simply go, oh yeah, that is a practical solution, right? Yeah, 1 + 1 = 2. But capitalists can't have that. They can't have 1 + 1 = 2 because they benefit if the number is 3, right? So it's 1 + 1 = 3 to the capitalists, because it has to be that way, because that's how they benefit. That's a bit of an odd way to describe it, but that's how I'm going to describe it. The capitalist ideology is tied up completely in this idea that humans need to be commodities themselves, right? That a human needs to earn their value, and the way they earn their value is by selling themselves into a billionaire-dominated market, right? Of course, they won't phrase it that way. Get a job, that's what they'll say. Get a job, right? As if the entire point of having a civilization isn't to ensure that there are as few jobs as possible. I find the jobs conversation to be so odd, right? Like, the whole point of having a job is to just get food and shelter for yourself. It's for survival purposes. But we've put the job ahead of the point, right? We've forgotten the practical reality. We've forgotten the practical point of a job. The practical point of a job initially was to provide a good or a service of some kind, right? And it was through that method that you would end up getting the food and shelter you needed. Well, guess what? We live in a highly technological society now. We live in a society where instead of it taking 90% of the populace to create food for the society, it takes 2% of the populace, right? We have these enormous machines that we've created over time. And instead of us looking at them and being like, oh man, we can all stop working so hard. We can all stop working so much. We can all be involved in this process of creating wealth and food for our society, while simultaneously having as much time as we can for leisure and other pursuits, right? But capitalism can't have that, right? Capitalism requires subservience to the death cult, right? They need you to be desperate. They need you to be poor, because if you are not desperate and poor, then maybe you'll start to actually believe and think that you can be part of some decision-making process, right? The capitalists don't want you to be part of the decision-making process. They want to make the decisions for themselves, and they want you to do all the work, and they don't want to do any of the work, but they get to take away all the benefit for themselves. This is the practical reality of the capitalist position, right? And what systems do they use to enforce this? They use the police. They use the system of wage slavery, which has been in place for centuries, right? Like, we fought a war over chattel slavery, but we haven't yet rid ourselves of wage slavery, which, as I always say on this channel, right, the way you get rid of wage slavery is that you structure your society so that the people who are actually doing the work own the businesses, right? You transfer the shares to the working class. You tell the capitalists to get bent, go get a job, and you move on, right? But the ideology that the capitalists rely on, right? And it always happens every single time. Start talking to a capitalist about practical solutions to real problems, and you'll immediately fall. They begin with their ideological, like, it's about deserving, how people deserve this or deserve that. And it's like, the concept of deserving has nothing to do with it, right? Everyone should have food and shelter, right? We don't know why we're here. We don't know what we're doing in this plane of reality. We don't understand what we're doing here. We have very little grasp on it, right? All we know is that this place exists and we are here. And it's no one's fault, right? It's no one's fault, and it's no one's prerogative, and it's no one is scheming or planning anything in regards to why we are here or what this is all about. All we know is that we are here, right? Here we are. And so if we are here, we don't understand why, then everyone who is here should have access to food and shelter as a way to encourage the best possible life for all parties, and simply to remove antagonism from our societies, right? There's this great thing, like when the pandemic started, there's this great thing people love to say. We're all in this together. No, we're not. It's very obvious that we're not all in this together. It's very obvious that we're not all in this together, right? If we were all in this together, right, there would have been a full lockdown. All services would have shut down. We would have accepted that, okay, we're not going to have a big party all the time anymore, right? You're not going to be able to go get your puzzle, that kind of thing. We would have actually struggled our grocery store or structured our grocery stores. We would have actually given people raises for actually being frontline workers, right? These sorts of things would have been the letter of the day, right? But there has been an enormous amount of concessions to a class of people who do no work, provide no value, and are parasites in the society. And that's the capitalist class, right? So this idea that we're all in this together is something of a joke to me. It's not something that I take very seriously. And yet, it's something that I'm consistently told that I have to believe, right? Like, we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. And there are some people who are in that storm in yachts, and there are some people who are just in the water. And so, someone like this gentleman, this carpenter who's making these tiny homes in Toronto, he looks at that and says, no, everyone should have a boat, right? In the midst of this storm, everyone should have even a little tiny boat. But the capitalist society turns around and says, no, that person can't have a boat. They didn't earn it, right? They didn't successfully comply to the demands of the billionaire class. And this transfer of spirituality and human exploration, right? Curiosity, this transfer of existentialism and philosophy away from more ephemeral concepts, right? Even a concept like God, right, is better than saying that the moral decider is money, which is exactly where we're at. The moral decider is money in a capitalist society. If you have lots of it, you are a good person. If you have none of it, you are a bad person. It's very similar. The arguments that's used against people who are living in poverty are very similar to the arguments that were used by Job's friend in the book of Job, right? If you actually read your Bible, and I recommend you do, even if you read it as a secular document, which I suggest you do, the book of Job is absolutely full of arguments against Job, that people say to him, his friends say to him, you must have done something wrong. Right? If you're unfamiliar with the story of Job, God and the devil make a bet that Job will recant his holy ways and condemn his love of God if the devil is allowed to destroy Job's life. Right? Job's a wealthy man, has a big family, lots of property. And so God gives the devil permission to destroy Job's life, and he does. And then Job's friends come, and they create arguments for why Job should recant his love of God. And one of them is, oh, Job, you must have done something wrong, right? Like, this must be you that has done this. And of course, Job's response is, what are you talking about, right? Like, the universe is this enormous, powerful force. This impenetrable, unknown series of forces, right? Even if you take that secularly, right? That gravity, very like scientific terms and ideas that we all agree exist. Like the capitalist ideology can't withstand even the most basic scrutiny, because so much of it is tied up in this idea of individualism, right? We've all heard that. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? You can do it, all of this. But really, when you actually scrutinize that idea and that statement, what's fundamentally being said by the capitalist class is that a single individual's energy can overwhelm and defeat the energy of all the rest of humanity, as well as all of the rest of the energy of creation, right? It's an absurdist position that truly cannot be tolerated by anyone with even an iota of intellectual power, right? Which is why we're retreating into delusion, why we're retreating into magical thinking, why we're retreating into this sort of wistful hopefulness that things will go back to normal now that we have Joe Biden in, right? We're retreating into this sort of wistful forgettability, right? We just are going to have complete and total amnesia about the Trump administration completely. And we'll just move on as if everything is perfectly fine and everything is perfectly normal, while we slave away under a death cult, right? That is actively structured itself to destroy the societies that it's inflicted, that are inflicted by it, and to enslave the citizenry, and then ultimately destroy itself, right? Because once it destroys the host, the people who are actually doing the work, right? Once it destroys those people, it will have no one left to feast on, right? Karl Marx articulated this, that eventually the workers will be paid such a low wage that they won't be able to afford the goods or services being offered by the capitalist class. And therein lies the collapse of the the entire project. And you can see this ideology rear its head in America through the COVID-19 crisis, right? Look at how little regard the Congress and the Senate and the presidency has treated its own citizens, right? Like here in Canada, the very first thing that happened is that there was the passage of the CERB, which was a basic income that they could have turned into a basic income permanently. But once the capitalist class realized what it had done, it immediately repudiated the liberals and had them start to dismantle that project, which they are in the middle of dismantling currently. But at least they transferred it into something like the CRB, and they transferred it into something like EI, right? And they actually created benefits so that people wouldn't actually fall into poverty and despair, because they put aside this ideological bent of needing to earn it or any of this, and they just recognized, and this is throughout the European nations as well, they just recognized that no, like, human lives come first, right? That fundamentally, when people say the economy, they don't actually know what they're talking about, right? When you say something like the economy right now, you are just talking about the vast fortune of the billionaire class. When in reality, the economy is just individuals, right? It's workers, it's individuals doing the work and building the assets that the capitalists then claim for themselves. And pass on throughout the generations and create hereditary and generational wealth. And I just lost that train of thought. I just lost that train of thought. What was I talking about there? Isn't that horrible? Isn't it horrible when you do that? When you're just like on this great thing, you're going to make a super good point, you're going to really land on it. That the capitalists are hoarding wealth for themselves, they don't care. Oh, right, the pandemic, right? So the rest of the nations, European, Canadian, and across the globe, right, we actually passed supports for our citizens. And you know what it's done? It's actually made our economy stabilize and grow, right? Why? Because people have money and they can spend that money, right? There's no sense that like, oh, a person has to earn their survival, right? There's no sense of that outside of this capitalist ideology, right? That if people are simply given money, well, what do they do with it? They spend it, right? And if you are an entrepreneurial type or a person who already has a business and you're living in a society where everyone has access to the common currency and money, well, guess what that does? It increases business. It gives you the incentive to create further services, right? It turns out that to actually build an economy, you don't give money to the wealthy people, right? Who just jam it in offshore accounts. You actually just give it to people And then those people will have demands, and then those demands will be met, right, by people who would like to meet them. And that's how you actually build an economy. And you know that that's true because over this COVID-19 crisis, the American economy has sank. It's sinking into the toilet, right? Why? Because they printed a whole bunch of money and gave it to the billionaires, who promptly jammed it in their offshore accounts and didn't do anything with it, right? Nobody is offering further services. Nobody's opening up their businesses. There's no demand being created there because nobody has the money, right? And in fact, because nobody has any money, it's creating all kinds of social problems that are the antithesis of how an economy should work, right? People being evicted, people having to choose between electricity and food, right? Like, it's not good for an economy for people to not have enough to buy basic goods, right? That's how you collapse an economy. That's how you make businesses move out of neighborhoods. And ultimately, the capitalist class always resorts to threats and coercion, right? That's ultimately where they land. That if you say, if you take the example of what I say, right? Well, we'll transfer the shares away from the capitalist class into the working class. And the capitalists will say something like, oh, well, we'll just move away. And my response has been, good. Yeah, that's the point, right? That I have gotten to the point where I don't see the capitalists, not only do I not see the capitalists as worthwhile, right? Not only do I not see them as a neutral force, I see them as an antagonistic force, which is doing negative things to our society fully. And if they were to suddenly up and leave, our society would improve dramatically because of it. Because the threat that a death cult is actually going to leave the area is completely positive, right? It's completely positive to expunge yourself of death cultists. So we should, right? We should. Okay, guys, this is going to be the end of me. Be sure to like this video, right? The likes send it around to the algorithm, right? That tells the algorithm to show this to other people. If you'd like to piss off your conservative uncle or dad, be sure to share it with them, right? Let them know that there are people like me who are saying that their entire system is fraudulent and is in free fall collapse, and they should be embarrassed by defending it. Be sure to subscribe if you've made it to this point. Hell, if you've made it to this point, right? It's almost a half hour. Come on, subscribe. Subscribe. You know you want to. And guys, for real, like, if you have a buck in your pocket that's jangling around, right? Just sign up for the Patreon. Throw that buck my way, right? It's less than a cup of coffee. And I could really use the moral support, if anything, right? All right. Don't let these guys gaslight you, right? The capitalist death cult is real, and it is attempting to destroy us based on its ideology. They value money more than they value your life. That's why they throw food into garbage bins and won't let people just take it home, right? That's why they would prefer homeless people living out on the streets instead of tiny little boxes, right? That money is their ideological driver. It's the only thing that influences their decision making. They're not interested in your life. They're interested in your labor, right? And so they will lie to you. They will gaslight you. And that little bit of anxiety or self-doubt is exactly what they want. They want you to be in this position where you are doubting yourself. So I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't. You're making good decisions. You're doing the right thing. You're fighting on the right side, and the thoughts that you have in your head are shared by other people. You are not isolated. You are not alone. I love you. I'm here for you. Good luck. We're gonna need it.